Okay, here's chapter 19. The Return of Rhyme and Reason. Sailing past three of the tallest peaks and just over the outstretched arms of the grasping monsters, they reached the ground and landed with a sudden jolt. "Quick!" urged Tock. "Follow me. We'll have to run for it." With the princesses still on his back, he galloped down the rocky trail, and not a moment too soon, for pounding down the mountainside in a cloud of clinging dust and a chorus of chilling shrieks came all of the loathsome creatures who chose to live in ignorance and who had waited so very impatiently. Thick black clouds hung heavily overhead as they fled through the darkness, and Milo, looking back for just a moment, could see the awful shapes coming closer and closer. Just to the left, and not very far away, were the triple demons of compromise. One tall and thin, one short and fat, and the third exactly like the other two. As always, they moved in ominous circles, for if one said here, the other said there. And the third agreed perfectly with both of them. And since they always settled their differences by doing what none of them really wanted, they rarely got anywhere at all, and neither did anyone they met. Jumping clumsily from boulder to boulder and catching hold with its cruel, curving claws was the horrible hopping hindsight, a most unpleasant fellow whose eyes were in the rear and whose rear was out in front. He invariably leapt before he looked and never cared where he was going as long as he knew why he shouldn't have gone where he had been. And most terrifying of all, directly behind, inching along like giant soft-shelled snails with blazing eyes and wet, anxious mouths, came the gorgons of hate and malice, leaving a trail of slime behind them and moving much more quickly than you might think. "Faster!" shouted Tock. "They're closing in!" Down from the heights they raced, the humbug with one hand on his hat and the other flailing desperately in the air. Milo running as he had never run before, and the monsters just a little bit faster than that. From off on the right, his heavy, bulbous body lurching dangerously on the spindly legs which barely supported him, came the overbearing know-it-all, talking continuously. A dismal demon who was mostly mouth. He was ready at a moment's notice to offer misinformation on any subject. Have you guys ever met anybody like that who just loves to talk even if they're wrong? And while he often tumbled heavily, it was never he who was hurt, but rather the unfortunate person on whom he fell. Next to him, but just a little behind, came the gross exaggeration, whose grotesque features and thoroughly unpleasant manners were hideous to see, and whose rows of wicked teeth were made only to mangle that truth. They hunted together, and were bad luck to anyone they caught. Riding along on the back of anyone who'd carry him was the threadbare excuse. A small, pathetic figure whose clothes were worn and tattered and who mumbled the same things again and again and again in a low but piercing voice. "Well, I've been sick, but the page was torn out. I missed the bus, but no one else did it. Well, I've been sick, but the page was torn out. I missed the bus, but no one else did it." He looked quite harmless and friendly, but once he grabbed on, he almost never let go. Closer and closer they came, bumping and jolting each other, clawing and snorting in their eager fury. Tock staggered along bravely with rhyme and reason. Milo's lungs now felt ready to burst as he stumbled down the trail, and the humbug was slowly falling behind. Gradually the path grew broader and more flat as it reached the bottom of the mountain and turned toward wisdom. Ahead lay light and safety, but perhaps just a bit too far away. And down came the monsters from everywhere, frenzied creatures of darkness lurching wildly towards their... Here's the chaos. Towards their prey. From off in the rear, the terrible Triumvirate and the wobbly Galatianus giant urged them on with glee, and pounding forward with the rush came the ugly dilemma, snorting steam and looking intently for someone to catch on the ends of his long pointed horns, while his hoof bit eagerly at the ground. The exhausted humbug swayed and tottered on his rubbery legs, a look of longing on his anguished face. "I don't think I can," he gasped, as a jagged slash of lightning ripped open the sky and the thunder stole his words. Closer and closer the monsters loomed as the desperate chase neared its end. Then, gathering themselves for one final leap, they prepared to engulf first the bug, then the boy, and lastly the dog and his 2 passengers. They rose as one and suddenly stopped, as if frozen in midair, unable to move, staring ahead in complete terror. Milo slowly raised his weary head, and there on the horizon, for as far as the eye could see, stood the massed armies of wisdom. The sun glistened from their swords and shields, and their bright banners slapping proudly on the breeze. For a moment everything was silent. Then 1,000 trumpets sounded, then 1,000 more, and, like an ocean wave, the long line of horsemen advanced. Slowly at first, then faster and faster, until with a gallop and a shout, which was music to Milo's ears, they swept forward toward the horrified monsters. There in the lead was King Azaz, his dazzling armor embossed with every letter in the alphabet, and with him the mathematician, brandishing a freshly sharpened staff. From his tiny wagon, Dr. Discord hurled explosion after explosion, to the delight of the sound keeper, while the busy din collected them almost at once. And in honor of the occasion, Chroma the giant led his orchestra in a stirring display of patriotic colors. Everyone Milo had met during his journey was there. They had all come to help. The men of the marketplace, the miners of Digitopolis, and all the good people from the valley and forest. The spelling bee buzzed excitedly overhead, shouting, "Charge! Charge!" Canby, who, as everyone knew, was as cowardly as could be, came all the way from Conclusions to show that he was also as brave. And even Sheriff Shrift, mounted proudly on a long, low dog, galloped grimly along. Cringing with fear, the monsters of ignorance turned in fright, and with anguished cries, too horrible to even forget, returned to the damp, dark places from which they came. The humbug sighed with relief, and Milo and the princesses prepared to greet the victorious army. "Well done," stated the Duke of Definition, dismounting and grasping Milo's hand warmly. "Fine job," seconded the Minister of Meaning. "Good work," added the Count of Consonants. "Congratulations," proposed the Earl of Essence. "Cheers," recommended the Undersecretary of Understanding. And since that's exactly what everyone felt like doing, that's exactly what everyone did. "It's we who should thank," began Milo, when the shouting had subsided. But before he could finish, they had unrolled an enormous scroll, and with a fanfare of trumpets and drums, they stated that, henceforth and forthwith, let it be known by all men that rhyme and reason reign once again in wisdom. The 2 princesses bowed gratefully and warmly, kissed their brothers, and they all agreed that a very fine thing had just happened. "And furthermore," continued the proclamation, "the boy named Milo, the dog named Talk, and the insect hereinafter referred to as the humbug, are hereby declared to be heroes of the realm." cheer after cheer filled the air, and even the bug seemed a bit embarrassed at having so much attention paid to him. "Therefore," concluded the Duke, "in honor of their glorious deed, a royal holiday is declared. Let there be parades through every city in the land, and a gala carnival of 3 days' duration, consisting of jousts, games, feasts, and follies." The 5 cabinet members then rolled up the large parchment and, with many bows and flourishes, retired. Swift horsemen carried the news to every corner of the kingdom, and as the parade slowly wound its way through the countryside, crowds of people gathered to cheer it along. Garlands of flowers hung from every house and shop and carpeted the streets. Even the air shimmered with excitement, and shutters closed for many years were thrown open to let the brilliant sunlight shine where they hadn't shone in so long. Milo, Tock, and the very subdued Humbug sat proudly in the royal carriage with Azaz. The math magician and the 2 princesses and the parade stretched for miles in both directions. As the cheering continued, Rhyme leaned forward and touched Milo gently on the arm. "They're shouting for you," she said with a smile. "But I could never have done it," he objected, "without everybody's help." "That may be true," said Reason gravely, "but you had the courage to try. And what you can do is often simply a matter of what you will do." "That's why," said Azaz, "there was one very important thing about your quest that we couldn't discuss until you'd returned." "I remember," said Milo eagerly. "Tell me now." "It was impossible," said the king, looking at the math magician. "Completely impossible," said the magician, looking at the king. Do you mean," stammered the bug, who suddenly felt a bit faint. "Yes, indeed," they reported together. "But if we'd told you then, you might not have gone, and as you've discovered, so many things are possible just as long as you don't know that they're impossible." And for the remainder of the ride, Milo didn't utter a single sound. Finally, when they'd reached a broad, flat plain midway between Dictionopolis and Digitopolis, somewhat to the right of the Valley of Sound and a little left to the Forest of Sight, the long line of carriages and horsemen stopped, and the great carnival began. Beautifully striped tents and pavilions sprang up everywhere as the workmen scurried about like ants. Within minutes there were racecourses and grandstands, slideshows and refreshment booths, gaming fields, Ferris wheels, banners, bunting, and bedlam, almost without pause. The math magician provided a continuous display of brilliant fireworks made up of exploding numbers which multiplied and divided with breathtaking results. The color, of course, being supplied by Chroma, and noise by the deliriously happy Dr. Discord. Thanks to the soundkeeper, there was music and laughter, and for very brief moments, even a tiny bit of silence. Alec Bings set up an enormous telescope and invited everyone to see the other side of the moon, and the humbug wandered through the crowd, accepting congratulations and recounting in great detail his brave exploits, most of which gained immeasurably in the telling. That means that he embellished a little every time he told the story. And each evening, just at sunset, a royal banquet was held. There was everything imaginable to eat. King Azaz had ordered a special supply of delicious words in all flavors, and for those who liked exotic foods, in all languages also. The math magician had provided innumerable platters of division dumplings, which Milo was very careful to avoid after what had happened last time. For no matter how many you ate, when you finished there was more on your plate than when you began. And of course, following the meal came songs, epic poems, and speeches and in praise of the princesses and the 3 gallant adventurers who had rescued them. King Azaz and the math magician pledged that every year at this same time they would lead their armies to the mountains of ignorance, until not one monster remained, and everyone agreed that no finer carnival for no finer reason had ever been held in Wisdom. But even things as fine as all that must end sometime.